How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boil Eye Hobby Time. Today I'm retrofitting a stagecoach with some mechanical legs and pitting it against a crew of ruthless bandits. After removing the stagecoach from the runner, it was time to assemble. These kits from Mech are pretty great. Sometimes they do have trouble sticking together. But they're the only Western scale models that I consistently find at my local hobby store. Or any store, for that matter. Which is one of the reasons why the Wild Imaginary West was built in 1:72 scale. In a Wild Normal West, it would be time to add a team of horses. But this ain't the Wild Normal West, so all I need is the coach and some bits. Bits of what? I hear you asking, and that's a great question. Bits of anything and everything, but primarily other model kits. The first step in most of my kit bashing projects is to rummage. Not just mindless rummaging like is the habit of some, but intentional, thoughtful rummaging for pieces that will spark ideation and creativity. The owners of this mech are extremely wealthy and they're not afraid to flaunt it. On the back of the coach is an armored section that acts as a survival shelter and safe box with food and water should a monster topple the mech and they be forced to hunker down and survive. Up front, I decided to repurpose this Gaslands machine gun into a twin Gatling gun turret, which is a little more period accurate. Gatling guns are extremely expensive, so this just goes to show the over-the-top wealth of the owners of this mech. In the Wild Imaginary West, mechs are most often repurposed vehicles that once rode on wheels. They are practical and pragmatic in nature because they take a real beating and they're out in the wild, so it's rare to see them exhibiting any form of blatant luxury or decadence. But in the case of these owners, luxury is what they're going for. That's what they want to communicate. You see, the owners of this mech are Jack and Eliza Kane, husband and wife team known as the Sunday Best. While they certainly don't frequent any local chapels in the West, they have made a lot of money as bandits, and luxury has become somewhat of a brand for them. The couple were notorious bank robbers from back east, and when their life of crime caught up to them, they were forced to flee west. Where they stole a stagecoach and began offering tours of the West to wealthy tourists, where they would stage fake robberies and steal from their customers, with the help of hired hands who were the acting robbers. After a few years of conning tourists, they decided to ditch the small stuff, soup up their stagecoach, and become high-profile, legendary bandits of the West. And should the law ever catch up to them, they would both prefer to go out wearing their Sunday best. After the upper section of the coach was done, I moved down to the legs, and I used the same method that I usually do for my mech legs, and that is to snip up some popsicle sticks, drill some holes on either end, which I can use as a point to pivot around. Once I'm happy with the placement and pose of the legs, I then glue them all in place. To wrap up the legs, I added some fake hydraulic pistons, and some other trim pieces, and then to wrap up the construction of the rest of the mech, I of course needed to add a forestall, which helps keep the monsters away, which I wired up to the rest of the machine with a guitar string cable. With that, the kit bashing of the mech was done, and it was time to clean up my workstation before moving on to the terrain. Along with the mech, I'll be doing some storytelling using an assortment of 1:72 scale Mech figures in various action poses. For the terrain, I'm going to be using some foam offcuts. I started by finding a nice big one that I could use as the base, and then I glued another one onto the back at a slight angle. To trim the base down to the correct size and get some nice clean sides, I broke out my hot wire table. If you plan on getting into the hobby of diorama making and plan to use foam, a hot wire table is on the short list of must-haves for me. If you plan on not getting into the diorama hobby, then it's on the short list of must-not-haves for me. With those nice clean sides, it was now time to mess everything up on the surface with some texture applied from a Dremel. I used a mask and a vacuum to keep the foam particles out of my lungs. That didn't keep them from going everywhere else. To give the rest of the foam, especially the flat spots, a little bit more variation, I used a butane torch, which I also used to give myself a little trail. I then broke out the utility knife and gave all the vertical surfaces a bit more texture and random rockiness. After that, I broke out the vacuum one more time, and finally, it was time to apply a layer of Mod Podge. This will protect the foam from everything that is about to follow. And the way I said that made it sound like a bunch of really bad things were about to follow. But what I actually meant was just all of the detailed texture in the form of texture paints from Vallejo and Citadel. I used the mud effect for the dirt areas that will have grass later on, and crackle paint for the lower section and for the road, and red earth paint for the dry gulch. I used my finger and a palette knife to blend and feather the edges together before impatiently waiting for that to dry. While I waited for that to dry fully, I made a little wooden bridge to cross the gulch. And once that had been trimmed and glued down, the last step was to sprinkle on some basing mix and seal it all with isopropyl alcohol and watered down white glue. I know I said that was the last step, but I'm not really sure if this next step counts as a terrain step. But the actual last step was to add the broken down wagon that has been robbed by the group of bandits. It came with some wounded guys on stretchers, but for our purposes, I removed the stretchers. Let's just say they're a little worse than wounded. With that done, everything was ready to be taken outside to prime. And while I paint all this, I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons. I followed the matte black primer with light gray zenithal. This is to help establish some initial shading values. I threw that on the landscape, on all of the banditos on the ground, and the mech as well. After the gray, it was time to apply some base colors using the airbrush as well. I was asked how I swap between colors quickly while I was working, and the answer is this little airbrush cleaning pot. All you have to do is drip in some water or some airbrush cleaner, spray it out, give it a good wipe, and you're good to go. Also, there's a reason McDonald's chose red and yellow to advertise their food, because it's hard to miss, which in most cases would not be a good idea in the wild imaginary West, but when you have the right firepower and armor on your mech, you can afford to be a little bit flashy. This group of bandits just made a successful robbery on a wagon traveling along a protected four-stall route from Bridgeport to Scottsbluff. That's how a lot of people can get away with traveling long distances in the West without their own personal monster-repelling devices. The shootout ended in multiple wounds to the bandits' side. No casualties, but on the other side there were no survivors. Hard-fought victory for the robbers, and the crew is now taking a moment to count up their haul, which was a surprisingly large one, considering the size of the wagon. After the base had been painted, I smothered it with pigment powders and activated those with isopropyl alcohol. This will help lock all those colors in place and give some additional blending between them as well. When that was dry, I threw on some static tack and static grass. I decided not to do this beforehand and then paint it all from black, but rather keep the original color and tint it with some additional variation after it was applied. I liked the tone of green that it started with. I flipped the diorama over and shook off the excess grass, which I swept up and will save for use in future projects. After tinting the grass a slightly different color in a few spots, all of the base coats were done. It was time to break out the wet palette and a brush for the rest of the details. Just as the bandits were beginning to count their spoils, from down the trail and around the corner approached a mech. It was faster than normal and had bright brass trim that was flashing in the sunlight. The leader of the posse stepped forward as the mech got nearer and came to a halt. "Howdy up there. Why don't you mind your own business? Let us gather our things and we'll be on our way. We're not looking to cause you any trouble. No need for you fine folk to end up like these here wagoneers." Eliza snickered and shouted down with a reply. "Oh, we're not afraid of any trouble. At least not what you could bother us with. What we're really after is what you just unrightfully took from those poor gentlemen lying in the dirt. Drop the goods, be on your way, and my husband won't rip you to shreds." At that moment, Jack swung open the armored panels on the front, revealing the glistening metal of his dual rotary cannons. The bandits on the ground realized the only way they were going to survive this encounter was to turn and run. It was better to swallow their pride and get a chance at revenge at some time later than to become just another group of fools who tried to duel with the Sunday best. After all the details had been painted and the characters glued into their positions, the last thing to do was to paint the sides of the diorama with black 3.0. And after that, I called it good. Before moving on to my final shots, please take a moment to appreciate the art challenge submissions sent in by my patrons. The theme that they voted on for last month was duels. Huge thanks and well done to all the patrons who participated last month. That is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out as always to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.